Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and Jon Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and a warm welcome to our audience around the world. We'll say good day because we're not sure what time zone you're in or what the time is where you are. Great to have you listening and watching. We're delighted to have a guest with us, another wonderful guest with us, Kam Kaur. Welcome, Kam. So looking forward to our conversation together.
Well, thank you both for inviting me, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night to everyone.
Exactly, wherever they are around the world.
Wonderful. So before we get going, we want to give Kam her proper introduction.
Absolutely.
So John, you're going to do that one for us.
Absolutely. Great pleasure to do that. So Kam Kaur is an experienced senior social worker with a demonstrated history of working in individual and family services over the last 20 years, mainly here in the UK, as far as I recognize. She's skilled in case management, risk assessment, crisis intervention, social services, public sector, and mental health work. Kam has undertaken various therapeutic trainings, including the brief solution approach focused on children, systemic practitioner intermediate level, attachment and narrative therapy, nonviolent resistance, and DDP level 1, which is dyadic development psychotherapy, for those who are not familiar with it.
I know. We're going to do it. Kam, you're at the coal face
Absolutely.
of, really tense situations in families and helping people to navigate through breakdown in relationship, especially with a focus on the children. So we're really looking forward to hearing your insights on relationships, what we can do better, and how we can even manage when things sadly come to the point where separation and divorce is inevitable. But it'd be great to start, wouldn't it, with just the background, your story, what's driving the passion and the focus that you have today. Tell us a little bit of where that's from.
Well, I suppose my passion really started when I started working with children and families. I accidentally fell into this occupation. So my daughter at the time, I just wanted to have a change of career, and I found myself in homeless, working with families who had got into a very destitute level. They were going to be evicted from their current homing situations. And then from that place, I kind of always wanted to help families to actually improve their lives. And that's really sort of where my journey started from. And over the last 20 years, I have been working with children and families within various public sector and charitable services. And I found myself thinking, things could have been really different if we had caught this family at the very earliest opportunities. And if we had given some of these families the right guidance and support, rather than saying, oh, okay, we don't think that they can work with us, or we can't work with them, shut people down, I feel that we could have made lots of differences. And I ended up working on the back end of services where families were often in high levels of crisis, children were in CAM systems, self-harming or coming to care. And when you look at their cases, it was just really tragic sometimes to read through that there was lots of opportunities for us to work with families in different ways, and because of resources or staffing levels or people not having the knowledge and experience, there were just sort of really missed opportunities, really. So that's how my journey into relationships came about, really.
Wow. And those are the insights that we're really keen to understand. The moments where you thought, if only.
Yeah.
What were the if onlys? If only what would have made a difference back then?
I think when I started working, I suppose it made a real difference to me. I worked with asylum seekers and refugees when they first started to come to the UK from European countries. And within that system, we looked at a lot of the what ifs. What if we miss this family? What do we need to do? So I think the planning of that service was really, really critical. Like, how do we get the children to school? How do we make sure if a woman comes and she's pregnant, how do we make sure she's going to get the right services? So I think sometimes it was those experiences when I moved over to children's services that we didn't necessarily plan. I mean, I always remember when I worked with especially ethnic minority families, they were either stuck in the system or they were too late within the system because of cultural differences or what they thought about the family or who had worked with the family. So there was lots of those kind of families that I often was left thinking, what if? Especially children, especially with parents with mental health as well. There was always a lot of what ifs and uncertainty. So when a parent suddenly has an episode of mental health, we go into crisis mode. I often think, well, what if we had brought that family on board at the very earlier stages? Where was grandmother? Where was grandfather? Where was uncle and aunt? Where was the school? Where are all those resources that we can quite easily depend on? But also, how do we support that? What if we spoke to the children earlier about mum and dad's mental health problems, and maybe we was able to explain to them in a way that they felt understandable, not knowing that the parents were really ill, they couldn't look after them. So there's lots of things, within my work. I mean, I think some of the things that I get, when I started working within children's services, especially when I started doing systemic family therapy, we worked with a lot of children there, and it was a shame, really. They didn't even understand why they had come into care, their reasons. They didn't understand the type of relationships they were having with their parents. And when I started doing life story work with these children, the first thing that they used to ask me, you know what, Cam, I know my dad wasn't great. I know he went into prison. I know my mum was an alcoholic. I know this was they had issues with drugs. I know all this stuff. All I want to know is, did my parents really love me?
Wow.
And that was really, really important. And for a child who all their life feel that their parents didn't love them, really brought me to this work that I'm doing today, because I think it's so important, even if we are struggling as parents, if we can show to our children, it's not your fault, you're not to blame, you're not the reason, we're just having some difficulties, and we share that with our children, I think things could be really, really different.
That's such a powerful point, that whatever is going on in the home with the couple, if we could learn to show and communicate consistently to children that we love them, that can make such a big difference. What are the things that you would encourage these parents to do? And are we talking about parents who have become homeless because of refugee situations, or parents who are going through difficult times together and are separating? What's the context?
I think I worked with unaccompanied minors. I worked with children who had to travel. We're living in a world where things are tricky. People do have to escape from places. Those circumstances are slightly different, and you'll be really surprised. Those children become more resilient because they still remain very connected to their family back at home. Their family, even from a distance, they feel very, very connected. If we think about children from separated households, their experiences are very different, in the sense that they are separated from loved ones, which they necessarily don't have much control over. They can't decide. They can't choose whether they want their parents to separate. They don't have that choice. They don't have that choice about where they're going to be living. They don't have that choice. They might have some choice around how much time they may spend with either parent, but they don't necessarily have much choice in that. So it makes it so much harder. Can you imagine? We all know what it's like to be stuck between two of our best friends, if we see in that way, and as a child, our drama that continues with that, oh my God. so-and-so said that to me. I'm really stuck because I really want them to come to the party and they can't come to the party, and I want this to come. It becomes a real dilemma for children. It's what we call a little bit of splitting. And then the child becomes so triangulated in the context of that relationship. It makes it so much harder for them. In the end, you know, when you've got two friends who are constantly arguing, constantly disagreeing, we end up having to choose one, don't we? Because it just makes it easier for us. So we end up choosing the one that we think we're going to get the most out of when it comes to a friend. We begin to barter in that relationship. We begin to bargain, which is a more favourable relationship for us.
Yeah.
And I suppose then we end up having to pick sides.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds your heart, your passion for the children is coming through to me very strong and clear in terms of supporting those kids and getting the right relationship there. But what advice would you give, or what advice would you give to the parents, I guess, in terms of how they can stay connected with the children, but also what do they need to do with each other to maintain their relationship with the children? Because now they're parenting apart, they're in different, a lot of the work I know that you do is for separated parents or on that journey of separation. What advice would you give them for how do they stay connected with the children, and how do they relate to each other?
I think it's really important. I mean, I've worked with a lot of couples where they are looking to separate and they genuinely want things to be different. And one of the things that I often say to those parents, first of all, sit your children down and have a conversation. Don't worry about, it's best if we don't do that at the moment. We're not sure. That's okay. You can still say, look, Mummy and Daddy are going through some difficult times at the moment. We're not really sure ourselves what's going to happen. But we want you to know you don't need to worry about that. We're going to sort it out because we're the adults. And I think offering that kind of a reassurance to children that you don't need to worry, because children will worry. They will pick up on if mums and dads are not getting on, or mums and dads are feeling under strain. I think also not to be negative about the other parent. I know we say that, but how do we demonstrate that we're not being negative? Don't start rolling your eyes at the other parent. Our verbal and non-verbal gestures play a big part in this. If we're communicating and saying, get your mom to say this or get your dad to say that, well, yes, we may be communicating, but what kind of tone? What does our gestures insinuate? Because children pick up on communication more so than what we say verbally.
Well, for all of us, they say it's only 5% what we say. If the rest is incongruent, they look at the body language and tone a lot more. So kids will pick that up faster.
And I think also parents, also our parenting styles start interplaying in that as well, because if there's a big difference in the way that your values, beliefs about how children should be reared, when you're together, you kind of compromise with each other a little bit, don't you? And you kind of prop each other up, and one can be good cop, one can be bad cop, but those big good cops and bad cops can become bigger differences.
Yes.
Or when children begin to pick up on those things as well. So being very consistent in like routines, boundaries, consequences, all those kind of things, be more aligned in those things. I think also spending time, if you are going to be thinking about separating, make sure you spend some time with your child, because sometimes we distance ourselves from the home or distance ourselves from each other or family life as well. In fact, actually ask your family and friends to support you during that time. Don't keep it into a big secret and then everyone else is thinking, oh my God, how do we navigate now that this couple has split up? Because that puts us in different camps as well, doesn't it? So making sure that your wider family isn't starting to say negative things about mom and dad as well, or children hear from your wider family or community. You could have a conversation in the playground with another parent. Suddenly it's become someone's talking about someone, and then suddenly your child hears from another child or someone. And that's happened as well. So you'll be surprised how some of our emotions can come out in different places for children.
Yeah. As you're talking, it strikes me that a lot of the children that we're talking about are children, under 18. They're young,
Under 10,
probably
probably.
under 10. Sorry, young people. I'm just wondering, do you have any experience of working with a slightly older, I don't know, maybe teenagers or beyond teenagers, getting to adulthood or into that stage, or does that come into your remit as well? Because I'm guessing the challenges are slightly different in that space, or they're the same. Any experience in that space?
I think with younger children, I think it's lots of reassurance, lots of support, lots of comfort. It's very much nurturing sort of environment. I think for older children, they're more cognitively able. They have a bit better understanding, and also they've had an experience with their parents. So it's a bit different in that sense. I think still we also need to think about context as well. And I think sometimes we miss that. We think, because this is happening now, this is something that we've experienced all our lives. It's not the case. Sometimes we focus too much on the here and now. And I think so for our older children, it's really important to remind them that they have had somewhat of a great journey. We have done things that are really good as mum and dad. Remember those holidays we went to? Remember all those things that we do, because we become quite emotionally attached to the here and now, and because of the uncertainty. And I think with your older children, actually bring them on board. Tell us a little bit, how do you think you're going to manage this? What are the things that you would like for us to know about? Rather than making plans and then expecting your children to adapt to that. Remember, for older children, they are probably more going into their identity. They're a bit more independent. They probably want more flexibility. So again, when you're planning around those things, making sure that they are included in that, rather than we've made the plan, now you just do what we say. And that's when you get into sort of rigid frameworks with teenagers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love what you said, of course, about including them as much as possible in making the decision, but also reminding not just the children, but the whole family of the good times that they've had before, as a kind of anchor to have a better conversation during the tough times. What else would you suggest that they learn or do, develop to have a better conversation during the tough times? Because it's really forcing us to be more grown up in our approach in a time where emotionally we don't want to be grown up. We want to throw our own tantrums.
I think one of the things that we need to really think about, and one of the things that I often, when I'm working with my parents, I kind of get them to think about how conflicting their conversations can be, and how misunderstandings can occur quite quickly. And it's not done intentionally. It's just that we're in a place where the conflict, and I talk about how the conflict becomes part of our communication and our behaviour. So if you're not listening to me and I'm not listening to you, I don't feel that my needs are being met in our communication, then I am more likely to become very defensive, judgmental, accusing, blaming, undermining. All those things become part of my conversation with you, in my conversation, in my understanding, in my written, in my non-verbal. So we get into these kind of patterns, if that makes sense. And I think it's really important. And one of the things that we do a lot in systemic family therapy is thinking about the patterns that we begin to adopt when we are in these kind of conflicting relationships or painful or negative relationships. So, for example, many families that go into court, they get into quite protesting moments. Do you know what I mean? I will prove my innocent. Yeah. I will have my day in court. And then the other one becomes very, very defensive, because that's what court does. We protest,
Mm-hmm.
We have a sense of
Defend.
unfairness.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna bring my case forward to you, and I'm gonna show you I'm the right. So we get into this right and wrong camp.
Mm.
But in relationships, it's a bit different, isn't it?
Mm.
Sometimes people are not always. It's intersubjective. It's about our attachment. It's about how we relate to those things. Because there was a time we related it on a very intimate, loving, personal, comfort, positive, all those kind of things. And now we've moved into this space. So what we try to do is really begin to think about how the patterns that were when they were in conflict, and how they've become bigger patterns in their relationship, and what do we need to do to make that cycle not become a recurring cycle, and how can we change that?
And this idea of patterns of behavior is such a powerful kind of framework to help them understand what's going on, because one of the things we like to say is it's not just you as a person being so confrontational, because if you think about other relationships, you can turn up differently. So what are some of the skills that you're applying in your other relationships that don't have that tension that you could bring into this one and change the pattern of behavior that you're stuck in? You're going to say something.
Well, I was going to ask if clearly, without disclosing anything that would implicate anybody, but are there any examples as you can recount of where things looked like they were pretty bad, the wheels were coming off, the relationship was looking very strained, and I'm sure you've seen that countless times. But I'm wondering if you have any examples where that was the situation, but something happened and they were able to turn it around. Just trying to give hope to people out there who may be going through challenges. Anything you've seen where it's been looking really bad?
Well, every case that comes to me, it's in a hopeless, helpless situation. And unfortunately, that's the nature of the work that we do. We do have cases where, children are highly resistant to want to meet with their mom or dad. Parents are not communicating. When I say not communicating, they're only communicating through their solicitors or somebody else.
They're not communicating.
Hostile.
Exactly.
Behind enemy lines.
I'm working with cases that are very, very high levels of conflict. They've been in court, out of court, back in court, just because they just can't agree on things. And I think what we do is we try not to take sides, and it's sometimes really difficult, really, because our own values, beliefs and things, you can understand where moms come from, or you can understand where dads come from. But if we go back to thinking about the patterns rather than the person, and we start mapping those out, and we begin to elevate the voice of the child and really begin to get the parents to mentalize. So one of the things I'm going to give is when parents get into disagreements, I don't know, and the disagreements are, a lot of the disagreements are often very minor disagreements. Oh, what time are we going to do? Oh, I'm not going to pick him up from there. I'm not going to be doing, and these are becoming big things. These have become big things. We're not deciding which school they want to go to, or they want to move home, and blah, blah, blah. And if we begin to really get parents to take it away from their personal relationship, and this is really important because our personal relationship is very much of intimacy, of a different type of a connection, but they still think they're in that relationship. So what we try to do is position them as two co-parents, as you would going to be dropping your child off to your friend's house for an overnight stay.
Right.
Yeah. So when we position them in that kind of a relationship and we get them to think about, well, what would you do in that scenario? Would you just drop your kid off at the bottom of the gate and say, there you go upstairs and sort yourself out? Is that what you do? Do you sit inside and say, oh, so-and-so's come and pick you up? So we get them to do some of the basic things like greeting each other. Hi, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. Which is what we would normally do with another co-parent. We wouldn't just not be rude and say, oh, they're here and go. You go and take your bag. And so we kind of go back to sort of everyday normal encounters that we normally do with people in a friendly, calm, respectful manner.
Which is what I mean about it's forcing us to grow up at a time where we want to throw our own tantrums, you know, when
Exactly.
when you're caught in this really intense emotional space. But I love that mental model of not constantly reliving the broken intimacy and the pain of the broken intimacy, but shifting expectations to a different kind of relationship. What with hindsight, and I mean this is a huge question, to answer it in any direction you like. Of all the brokenness and pain and, you know, hopeless situations that you've had to deal with, and you're trying to restore communication with the children, what do you wish people knew beforehand that maybe could have helped them go in a different direction, or could help them talk about going their separate ways better? What could we help people know beforehand before it gets to hopelessness?
Good question.
I think it's really important for people to access early help. And because if we go through a different route, then that could take you down a different path, if that makes sense. So make sure you find out all the different types of resources that are available. Try and mediate with your family, get family members on board, access mediation or programs like ourselves at the earliest opportunity. I would say to people, if you are in a lot of pain, and these relations, you know, we don't break up because, oh, we're all okay. There is pain attached to relationships, hurt, deep hurt, especially if there's things that have gone on in your relationship, and you know that relationship could have been abusive as well. So we've got to factor that in that as well. And I think it's really important that we really begin to think about what do I need to make sure that I can be the best mom, or I can be the best dad, or remain the best mom and remain the best dad without me thinking about, I don't like that person, so therefore if I don't like them, then that means then no one else can like them either.
And it's that bitterness that then becomes destructive in the home, even when you're no longer with that other person. The children bear the brunt of that.
We get into like revenge seeking. We want to hurt them in the same way that we feel hurt. And so then when we get into those kind of patterns where you will feel what I feel, then sometimes it's not the greatest thing. And if anything, I think it causes you more distress, because you've got to keep that. It's hard work. I mean, when I'm working with parents, I say to them, can you imagine what it would be like if you didn't have to argue anymore?
Wow.
Tell me what that space would look like. Say, imagine that you two could just say hello to each other and not have to argue about little Jimmy's left his shoes at mom's house and now it's all mom's fault. Or do you know what I mean? Imagine if you didn't have to have those arguments anymore. Imagine if you both could just get on with your life and you didn't feel like this. What would that look like? And it feels like a real relief for parents when we kind of put that out on the table. Imagine if we've got a blank sheet today. What would you like to put on there? That blank sheet.
I'm sure that you'll share, and we'll be able to put in the links, some ideas of where people can get early help. I think the courage to realize things are difficult and reach out for help, that's always a challenge for people. I mean, we like to quote Albert Einstein, who said, just realize you can't solve a problem with the level of thinking that got you there. You have to get input from
More
outside
information,
to
yeah.
help build your understanding and address the problem. So mediation, you mentioned talking to family and friends, even though that can be polarizing. So really choose who you speak with, people who can be more objective, I suppose, and honest. What else? Mediation, talking to family and friends, maybe
I think
getting
also,
therapy for themselves if
oh
they.
yes, individual therapy. So if you are feeling a little bit distressed or unsure, I mean, even that sometimes cannot be helpful, because then you feel, because it's a person-centered approach, it's not a
Couple.
systemic
Mm-hmm.
or a couple approach or a dyadic approach.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, it can be quite tricky. But there's nothing wrong with getting this kind of support in this at the very, very early stages. I think also as well, schools are really helpful resource. You know, let's not miss them out, because if you are struggling with the other parents, sometimes schools will step in and support with some of those transitions, because you don't want to face the other parent at the moment, or you're still struggling, but at least they can put some support in for your child as well in relation to that. And they are a lot more on board supporting parents, because lots of different types. But also contact your local authority. You know, there's lots of reducing parental conflict resources now out there in England. So there's lots of resources that you can access through your local authority, or family hubs as well. That's another resource that's going to be soon be made available to families. So there's lots of different types of resources out there. Lots of resources are very psychoeducational, so there's lots of online stuff as well available as well. But I think sometimes, as much as, you know, we used to do this, you know, myself, and one of the reasons why Claire Phil set this up, because she used to do this work individually with parents. And one of the tricky things is, when you do work individually, what happens is that parent goes away thinking, that's not me. That's
always them.
Oh, well, then, you know, it's not me that's done that. That's mom or dad, and that's their problem. Oh, they're the ones that are struggling with feeding little Jimmy the greens, or they're the ones that got the discipline problems, not me. They're fine with me. So again, it's not that. I mean, one of the things I often ask my parents, when you were going through this, how readily had you thought about the transition that your child makes across two homes? You're sitting in your nice, comfortable home, in your bed, eating what you want to do. You've still got your weekend plan. How often have you thought about that journey that your child has to make, get in the car with the other parent, being picked up, holding all their personal items in a bag, or their favourite toy, or whatever they wanted to take, or they've forgotten something, then going to another home, having to think, oh God, now I've got to get myself comfortable in this bed. The sensory processing for a child, what I see is differently, what I'm hearing is differently, what I'm smelling is differently, the food tastes different now, what I'm feeling is different. So again, all those things become a little bit more heightened as we're doing those transitions, don't they?
Yeah.
And they never really thought about it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that you mentioned England. We're in the UK here for some of our audience around the world. We're in the month of May at the time of recording this. In fact, certainly this month, but this week, mental health awareness is on the agenda for a lot of people. And a lot of certainly the people that we speak to are not really aware of the implications of the challenges they're having on their children's mental health. What have you seen in that space in terms of the implication on young people's mental health and so on? I don't know what you see.
Family breakdown is an adverse childhood experience, whether we like that or not. It's one of the indicators. And so let's not joke that it's not, okay? And so your child is already in an adverse experience.
Yeah.
And the only way that can be mitigated is if we can reduce the level of conflict between the adult relationships and the child's relationship is somewhat maintained with the other resident parent. Because regardless of what parents sometimes say to me, oh, that parent wasn't absent because they were at work, they don't have a relationship. Children form attachments, whether it's good or bad, it's an attachment. It's a significant adult in their life.
Yep.
And let's not remove that, because when children are having to remove or take their own identity, that's part of their identity. That other parent is part of their identity. So when we're asking them to remove or discard that other parent away from them, you're asking them to take half of themselves away.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
that's really difficult thing. You know, if I say to you now, you know what, half of you cannot accept. That nose that looks like your dad, or your, you know, things that remind you of mom and dad, you have to remove that now. You can't have those memories. You cannot believe that they loved you. Yeah. It's a really, really, imagine if you have to do that. It's really, really difficult. So what we say is that what it does emotionally and physiologically, it's harmful. It's almost like emotional abuse, because it increases anxiety and stress for children. The distress that children experience is higher levels of sadness, anger, frustrational, emotional withdrawal, not being able to cope with things. They begin to mimic some of the conflict. You know, I say to my parents, why do you think your child has suddenly started shouting at children in the playground? Where do you think they've learnt that? You know, oh, well, I don't know. You know, well, I don't think it's the school, because they've got a policy around it.
Exactly.
I wonder where they've picked that up from, you know, and we begin to get them to think about that, you know, children's aggressive, defiant behaviour at home and socially. Where do they learn this stuff? More and more of our children are emotionally not coping with just the world itself in the other side. And if the home environment is not stable, not consistent, highly emotive, then our children are going to suffer emotional harm. So what we want to do is make sure that if we really want to make the difference, we've got to be able to think about, you know, lots of my parents will say, you know, if I say to them, what would you like your child to be and grow up in the more, you know, when they're grown up? Well, how do you think they're going to achieve that in this environment?
Yeah. That's I love the way that you help to create the to help parents to feel it, to see it and to feel it, to understand from a child's perspective what's going on. And we know that, you know, sadly, especially if there's abuse or severe disagreement and brokenness in the relationship, it's not healthy to stay together. But finding ways to reduce the conflict for the sake of the children and their own mental health has to be the way forward, whatever the cause of the separation for everybody's future.
I worked in mental health services. I worked for a mental health service which was for looked after children, and I worked on services which were on the edge of care. So this is where children were being considered to be brought into care, but we'd put some intervention services in right at those front end. And you know, one of the reasons why a lot of children don't get mental health services is because if we really need to assess a child's emotional difficulties, we need to have a stable home environment to understand what is normal and not normal in the context of their emotions. Because otherwise you can come down to misdiagnosing children for behavioural difficulties which are out of their control. So if we really want to make a difference, and that's a big difficulty, because we can't assess children properly, because we can't control the environment that they live in. We can control some environments like school and places like that, if that's where the behaviour difficulties or emotional difficulties are coming from. But we can't always control. And if that home environment has been unstable, then we need to stabilise that so that we know how children maladaptively behave.
Wow.
That's such a powerful point. You know, how can you even help the kids if home isn't stable enough to make the assessment as a ground zero?
And more children, you know, if you look at these traits from intense and frequent conflict and family breakdown, more and more children, if you think about it, you know, when we were growing up, I didn't know anyone that had ADHD or autism or things like that. You know, these were just like, what do you mean? You know, and now we've got lots of these diagnoses. And yes, it's great that we've got names to some of these things, or where children have got some neurodevelopmental delays or learning needs or social needs. I do think it's really great for those children to get some kind of a diagnosis to help them to get the right resources. But there's lots of children who've just being diagnosed with emotional and behavioural things. What does that mean? Where does that leave them?
Yeah. And what do they do next now that it's labelled?
Yeah. So I've got this label on me now. And having a label like that, it's not great, is it? And if you, as an adult, oh, well, he's got emotional and behavioural diagnosis.
It's something they can carry
what are the
for
chances
life.
of you getting employed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, you've really kind of made the point even bigger. I'm failing for words now, but it's just such a powerful point. The home environment that we create, the stability of the home environment that we create has such a long-lasting impact on children and their mental health and their future. So do everything we can to keep the home together. But even if you must separate, get the help you need to separate with as minimal amount of conflict and disrespect as possible.
I say a lot. I often ask my parents, your child has got one chance of childhood.
Wow.
They've only got one childhood. There can only be one. There can only be 10 at one time in their lives. You know, in adulthood, we got lots of different chances to become an adult, to get into relationships, but we don't get lots of chances to be a child, do we? We don't. And so we've only got one opportunity to have the best childhood ever. And if we was to say, you know, most of my parents will say, I want the best happiness. I want them to do this. I want them to have fun. I want them to do that. Yet I get them to reflect, well, how can your child possibly have that or aspire to that with you two?
Yeah. So in light of that, and it's such a powerful point, your child only has one chance at childhood. What advice would you give to parents in light of that in terms of relationship advice? One chance at childhood, you should be doing this.
Get help if you can't work it out. If you cannot tolerate the other parent and you are feeling so hateful or upsetting or whatever you're feeling towards them, get some help, because it's not just for yourself, it's for your child as well.
Yeah.
Don't ruin their chances.
3 words: get some help.
Get some help.
Love it. Summarizes. I mean, it's a really tricky situations to get through, but the implication of not getting it right has long-lasting implications on the people you love most. I mean, arguably, for some of them, they're done loving the other person now, but the children, if you love those children, you want the best for them. You really want the best for them, get some help.
Yeah. Wow. Kam, thank you so much. You know, it's just so insightful, so powerful, so eye-opening and wonderful to hear the perspectives from the child's experience, because so often we're focused on the couple and, you know, how they can turn out better for each other. But you've just helped bring such awareness over the impact it's having on the children and how we need to be better adults for the sake of the children who are experiencing life through what we do.
So I was going to say, as we leave, where can they get some help? Where would you signpost people to get some help? Contact yourselves, or what's the best thing for people?
Yeah, well, we've got a website. So we're called the Parenting Part Program. We do work with parents face to face, but also we do a lot of our work online because it allows us to do that online. So you can contact with us at any point, and I'll leave the link with you guys to,
Thank you. We'll
to
put
make
that in the show
contact
notes.
with us.
Yeah, so Parenting a Partner, we'll put that in the show notes. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing. And as we end, anything you wanted to share that we've not had a chance to touch on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here and, raising the awareness around children's mental health. And really, if you can give your child their best childhood, then they are going to thrive into adulthood as well.
Amazing.
You're also improving their adult, childhood, but you're also improving their adulthood experiences as well.
Yeah.
The person that they will become.
It's for life. It's for life, Tremaine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you for the work that you do, on behalf of all those who are in trouble and benefit from it. Thank you for the work that you do and just keep doing a great work. So important. Thanks for spending time with us, Kam.
Thank you. Thank you once again. Good night. Goodbye. Good morning.
Wherever you are around the world, it's been great having you with us. Thank you, Kam, and we'll see our audience again next time. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The4Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.